Welcome into this video tutorial brought to you by tutvid.com. We're looking at the low poly effect today. We're going to do it completely from scratch, even though there are some applications out there that will do this effect for you. I think, and the best results I've ever gotten have been when I just do it by hand, do it myself, and then we're going to play around and add a quick background behind it and some of this lighting effect. But the main thrust of the tutorial will be creating this low poly effect. We're going to begin with this image here in Photoshop. Now, the very first step is going to be to open up your preferences. Command or Control K is the hotkey. You're going to come over here to Guides, Grid, and Slices. Now, depending on all of the colors in your image, I know we're working with a person here, but you can apply this low poly effect to an animal, to a landscape scene, to a vehicle, car, airplane, whatever, you name it. In this case, I think the light red colored grid is going to be best for us, and then a grid line every 10 pixels works. If you're working with a smaller image, you might want to make this smaller. In fact, you know what? Just to be a contrarian, I'm going to make the grid line every 8 pixels, and a subdivision, by the way, of 1. I think the default in Photoshop is 4. We're going with 1. So we're going to hit OK. The next thing you can do is go View, Show, Grid. Note the hotkey, Command, and the apostrophe. That's going to be kind of important because as we work, you may want to quickly shut off the grid so you can see what you're getting. So just that Command apostrophe is a great little hotkey so you know what you're working with. Next, grab the pen tool, and we want to make a couple changes here on the pen tool. You want to not be drawing path, but be creating new shape layers. So every time we draw a shape, we're creating a new layer. So all of our little triangles are going to be on their own layer. And oh, by the way, I should have mentioned right at the beginning, we're going to be doing all of this in Photoshop only Photoshop. We're not going to be jumping over to Adobe Illustrator, and because this is path-based, you're going to be able to scale it up or scale it down even here in Photoshop. So that's going to be pretty cool. So we're going to work with shape-based stuff. Next up, we're going to make sure fill is set to nothing. And then stroke, I'm going to set stroke to white as it is, and then half a point or even 1 point. Either of those will probably work. I'm going to stick with half a point for now. And then you have other options here as far as aligning edges, auto add, delete. I wouldn't even mess around with any of that stuff. Maybe the only thing that could be useful is this rubber band feature. Turn it on. It's going to allow us to see in real time exactly where we're drawing our paths with the pen tool. Next up, we go View and make sure snapping is turned on, and just ensure that snap to grid is turned on, because we're going to be doing a lot of drawing where we're dropping points right on specific points of our grid, and if Photoshop is helping us by snapping to that stuff, hey, great. It's going to save us a lot of time. So let's zoom in here and dive right in. I'm just going to zoom in. I'm going to begin with the face because it is sort of the focal point of what we're doing. And I'm going to begin with the forehead. Now, here's what we're going to do. You really want to try to keep areas like the eyebrow all together. So the eyebrow is going to consist of a bunch of smaller triangles, and the skin around it's going to be, its own series of triangles. But the trick is, I feel like I'm saying that a lot. The trick is, when you're creating these shapes, number one, you want to be creating triangles, not squares, not other shapes, nothing like that. I'm going to zoom way in here. And you want to sort of, you can see here, I'll just make my first triangle, make it right along here, something like that. All right, boom. Now, this is kind of important. See, we've just created our first shape. Well, we want to go ahead and create another shape. If we just hit the Enter key, it's going to basically commit that path. So now we can go and create another shape and not have to worry about accidentally picking up any of the anchor points from that other shape that we created. So we've got one shape, two shapes. They're both on their own layer, and that's great. So I would create a series of triangles that make up her eyebrow. That's great. But here's another very important thing. As we move out into the skin, again, we're just creating triangles. We want to sort of create a series of triangles that make up this highlight here, right? You see this highlight, and then it sort of gets darker here. And then we sort of have more highlight here and highlight here. All of that is going to be triangle. We wouldn't want to make a big triangle that maybe starts up here and comes all the way down here and over, because really the triangles here need to be a little bit darker, whereas the triangles here in the highlight need to be brighter. So when we're looking at our finished low poly effect, we have highlights and lighter colors in our geometric shapes where lighter colors need to be. So just keep that in mind. Like we're going to draw these triangles right up to the edge of her hair. Why? Well, of course, because we don't want the skin color over where the hair is going to be. So just keep that in mind. I'm going to speed this up a little bit. I'm going to start drawing a ton of triangles here. It's probably going to take 600 triangles to make this effect with her, but I'm going to get started right now. So you can see here we basically have the forehead done. Now to walk you through a couple of the shapes here, since I just kind of jumped right into that, I'll walk you through and show you why I'm kind of placing shapes where I'm placing them. I'm going to zoom in here just a little bit. And by the way, you want to try to avoid small shapes. I've got that small sliver in there. That's not necessarily the best thing. All right, so what I've got here, I've got a little bit of highlight here. I want to follow the edge of the hairline. So I'm going to grab the pen tool. I'm going to click right there to begin where I had triangles already placed, or had a triangle already placed. I'm going to move down the hairline right there, come over, join the end of my triangle, and then join my path together. When you see that little circle appear beside the pen point, boom, that means you're joining a path. Enter or return, great. I'm going to move down to my next triangle here. I'm going to take it to this edge here. I come right back into here. There we go. Now the reason I made that triangle so much smaller is because that's all kind of the same color, and we're starting to get a little bit darker as we move down here, and obviously we have this bit of her eyebrow as well, which we're going to get here in a second. So I'm going to do this right here along the edge of her eyebrow, join these, just like that. Great. We can come down and get the eyebrow now, or at least a piece of the eyebrow, something like this. Wonderful. And then continue getting the eyebrow here like this. See how only now when we fill these two pieces with color, it's going to be eyebrow color. And actually we need to do another one right like this. All right, so those kind of little details, they all make a big difference in your final finished product. So don't ignore that stuff. Keep all that stuff in mind. All right, so here we've got kind of shadow coming around as we approach the eyebrow. Let's bring a new triangle out here because that's all kind of the same color. See, we're starting to get into highlight here, so I know that the triangle here is going to be a little bit different. I'm going to get to that in a second. Let's get this triangle right here. There we go. Cool. You can see everything just lines up really nicely, and because we're snapping right to our point, we don't have to worry about really messing anything up. Because everything's going to click right to these points in this grid that we've created. See, now that I know the base of my triangle is going to run from this point in the grid to this point in the grid, because that's where my lines already are. So I'm going to begin at one of them. I'm going to stretch way down the nose here, right? Because I know this is all one big highlight. All right? So just like that, we've got a nice big central highlight coming down the nose. And then over here, where I know I'm getting into shadow, I'm going to start making these a little bit darker because I want to be able to fade from kind of a medium darkness to a much darker darkness over here. All right, just join this right up. Boom. And then here, I'm going to take this, maybe like this. There we go. Great. So we're coming right down the side of the nose. All right, I'm going to speed things back up, and I'm going to get back to work here. All right, so now as you can see, we've gotten kind of the nose shaped out. I've been careful to try to add lots of triangles here where the shadow needs to be, because if we build the shadow on the nose, the shadow and the highlight actually on the nose correctly, the nose is actually going to look fairly distinguished and kind of the way it should look, instead of just looking like a flat, funky looking something on the front of her face. Now comes the point where we're going to start doing the eyes, which need to be the most detailed. So we're probably going to create up, 50 or 60 triangles per eye. Well, I still need to build underneath her eyebrow over here, so maybe I'll go do that first, and then we'll jump in to creating the eyes. I'm going to knock out underneath this eyebrow. I'll be back in just a second. Alright, so as you can see now, that eyebrow's brought all the way down to the lash. This one I guess still needs a little bit more work before we're ready to work on the eye. But let's just knock this out. I'll kind of walk you through how I take care of the top of the eye, and then we're going to build out from the eyeball. So what I'll do here is I'm just going to focus right along the front of the eyelid. I don't want to really get to where the heavy black makeup on her eyelash is, because obviously those little bits, we want them to be different colors. So I'm going to work right along here just like this. Fairly thin shapes. I don't usually like to go quite this thin, but you know what? I'll do what has to be done. There we go. That looks good. Bring that right through there. Great. Let's create another one here. So now I'm coming down into the point where we're kind of meshing up with the black hair and the eyelash. So you want to be careful, but we're still gonna try to keep that distinguishing line here between the eyelash and the hairline, even though when it is colored, it's gonna kind of blend together a little bit. All right, let's work our way here into the eye. Let's first, I guess, draw out this triangle here so we can get kind of this darker bit, and that's going to allow us to reach in here and get what appears to be a little bit more of a highlight here beneath her eye. And now we can reach up here and get this. Join that. Great. All right, so now that we have this, let's focus on the eyelash. We're going to break it down one bit at a time. So here for the eyelash, we're going to reach up to about there. Cool, that works. That's all about the same color, right? Right within there. Let's just fill this little bit in right in here because that's all about the same color as well. Great. From here, we can reach out. We can just reach right to there. And this whole bit is going to be that kind of dark blue-black of the upper eyelash color. We're going to begin from here again. We can actually just reach right across to there. And obviously, your shapes are probably a little bit different than mine, but, you know, just follow the same principles where we're looking for blocks of the same color. All right, so we're going to follow this hairline as I mentioned before. There we go. Create a triangle right off there. Great. Now let's create this triangle, which comes back to... Where can we connect to this? We can connect it right there. The lines are going to be slightly off, but once we have it filled, again, we can go in and adjust anything on a pixel-by-pixel basis afterward when we go to really perfect this. All right, so what we need, we don't really have a point where we can join along here, so we're going to have to make our own, but this sort of top corner of the eye is kind of all the same color. So let's just create a triangle, maybe like that, which is about, you know, just kind of covers up that little bit of the eye. Now that we're getting into this point here where we're going to be messing around with the center of the eye, I'm going to zoom in just a little bit more here. And let's, you know what, actually, I'm going to undo. I'm going to get rid of these couple triangles because watch. What we can do here is we can take this big triangle that we just created. Let's take this the corner of this one here. I grab my move tool and just command clicked it. Then I hit the letter A and go back to my direct selection tool. If we bring this point down one more, we have this perfectly straight line which is going to run across the top of the eye, and that's going to really be helpful for us when we go and start filling in all these little triangles. So now that we have that, let's go back up to the top of our stack of shapes. Let's drag this across, meet that up there. Boom. Boom. Cool. Whoop. I think I messed that up. Let me try that again. There we go. Made our shape. Cool. All right, so now that we have this, what we can do is we can begin like right here. We can draw straight down, just make like this triangle right in the middle of the eye, right? That's going to work. And then we can take this and make a little bit of a triangle like that. So we have sort of the bottom of the eye. And then we can take this up to like there. There we go. So we're just keeping kind of our colors all the same. Here at this point, we can make this. That's kind of the same-ish color. Don't be afraid of having too many little pieces in the eye. It's really going to be helpful later on when we start coloring this thing. Actually, I'm going to reach down into here because we're going to have some green in there, which is going to be great. Now from here, we can reach out into the eyeball. That's kind of that bluish-gray, very, very dark, though. Let's complete this grouping of triangles. Great. All right, let's get the rest of this green here. Cool. And now from here, we can grab kind of a whole chunk of green. That would be that. Great. And then extend this out just a little bit so we can make sure we get all of our greens. We can then take this. This is all kind of the same color here on the outside of the eye. So as you can see, the eye is going to be very, very detailed, especially compared with the rest of the bits of skin, which we're really just kind of, you know, taking big, broad swaths of as long as we're generally following, you know, where we see highlights and things of that nature. The eyes are really important. If you get the eyes, everything else kind of just follows that. Let's take this out to here. There we go. Great. Now I'm going to take this. I just block that out as well. Cool. I can now take this. I'm just going to bring this down to about here to follow that hairline. That's all eyelash stuff, so that's going to be easier once we get out here to where we're messing around with eyelashes again. You know, we can take these in slightly bigger chunks because, as you can see, it's just kind of generally dark, and it's going to work really well when you see all this dark around the focal point of the eye because it's kind of just, you know, kind of expected. All right, so let's do another one of these triangles here in the eye. Great. Let's take this to here because we have more darkness there. Cool. Let's get the dark that's down here. That's good. Whoops. Make sure I join the paths correctly. There we go. Now we've got the highlight. So I'm going to select this. It's probably just going to be a couple triangles here. So we get the first bit of the highlight. Boom. Second bit of the highlight. Great. And the highlight will be in 4 parts. All right, so we'll get that part of the highlight, and then we have more, which is going to be like here. There we go. Cool. The highlight is super important. It adds all the depth to the eyeball itself, so you really want to make sure you get that highlight fleshed out nicely. All right, so we're going to go over this part of the eye. Boom. I'm going to drag out another shape here. See, I'm just following the colored part of the eye because I know, like, I can't have something that stretches from the whites of the eyes to the colored portion of the eyes. It's going to give me some serious issues down the road if I do that. It's just not going to look all that great. I mean, you'll still be able to roughly tell it's a human being, but it's gonna kind of detract from the goodness of it, if you will. All right, there we go. Cool. All right, looks great. This is going to look good. Cool. All right, and then over here for the whites of the eyes, well, this is pretty simple, right? We can just stretch right out and grab a big chunk there. That looks good. I can grab this bit in here. That looks good. And this is where snapping is great because I know I'm locked into these corners, right? Now, see, I'm tempted to reach from here and go all the way to that corner, but the problem is I've got the whites of the eyes here, and then this becomes this kind of brownish-reddish mix. So I'm just going to kind of cut it off there, and I know it's not perfect, but it's going to lead to us having a much better finished product, so I don't mind having a slight imperfection. We can always go and correct that imperfection later. There we go. Cool. Let's get this. See here, once again, I really want to take it all the way out, but I'm not going to. There we go. Great. So, I mean, as you can see here, just a lot of little triangles making up the eyes, but it is going to pay off in the end. It's going to pay off big time because it's just going to look so much better. I'm slightly distracted here while I'm talking because I'm focused on creating triangles. There we go. All right, so I'm going to put this lower part of the eyeball together, and then I'm going to go do the other eye, but I'm going to do it all in a high speed, and I will return again in a little bit. So as you can see here, we're starting to make some progress now. As I get down to kind of the darker part of the image, I think that I'm going to change the color of my red grid, even though it's going to really stand out well over the hair. I think I'm going to change it to a different color. So I'm going to Command K here into Guides, Grid, and Slices, and I'm going to try like the light blue. About yellow. Yellow sticks out, but that's a little bit too powerful, maybe. I want to roll with magenta. You know what? I'm going to go with the light blue. I think light blue is going to work well. There we go. Cool. All right, so you can see I've got this cheek basically finished. I'm going to zip through and finish this off here. Boy, it takes some time, doesn't it? All right, I'm going to knock this cheek out and then get down to the chin, and we'll be through this before we know it. So as you can see there, we just did the lip portion, and the lips are fairly complex. I'm going to knock away the grid for a second. So we've gotten the eyes done, we got the nose done, we got the lips done. Everything else should be fairly simple as we go through here and complete this low poly effect. So I'm going to speed it up. I'm going to knock all the rest of this out as quickly as I can, and then we're going to go ahead and begin the coloring process. So now that we have that, we have all of these shapes. You can see I just created 797 shapes. All of that sped up. It really took about an hour and a half, almost 2 hours to do all that drawing. So now we get to do the fun part, which is coloring all of this stuff in. And just like we did with our framework here, I want to start with the forehead. So I want to start by coloring in this stuff and just slowly work our way out. And again, I'm going to speed this whole process up as well for the sake of the tutorial, so you don't have to sit through and watch me do every last little bit. It's very simple. It's basically you're going to go through and do the same thing over and over and over again. This is what you need to do. Well, first of all, how do we know which triangle we're selecting? Well, it's actually pretty simple. I think the first triangle we drew was here on the eyebrow. So let's grab the move tool, and we're going to hold down the Command or Control key and click on that. And sure enough, boom, guessed it right, shape 1 right there. So I've selected that layer. Once we have that layer selected, well, we're on shape 1, so we can just do this one shape at a time. Well, you know what, actually, scratch that. What we need to do first is select all of these layers. Well, and you do this here. I should explain this, right, before I scroll all the way up to the top. Select shape layer 1, and then go all the way up to the top. Hold down the Shift key and select shape 979 or whatever it is in your case. What we need to do here is get rid of all of these lines. Actually, I'm going to pause here and just save this document just in case something goes horrifically wrong. We don't lose all that work that we just did. But we're going to select all the shapes. Let me save it real quick. All right, boom, we've got it saved. Let's get back to these shapes. So we've got all the shapes selected. What I'm going to do is grab my direct selection tool, which is this tool right down here. The white arrow, hotkey is the letter A, direct selection tool. And we're going to set the stroke to this slash option. So once we do that, you can see, whoa, we just got rid of everything we did. Well, we didn't. We just got rid of the stroke that was on all of those little bits and pieces. If you want to keep the stroke, you can do that, but you're going to have to remove it piece by piece by piece. And you'll see here, when I go all the way back down to shape layer 1, and I just select shape layer 1, let's zoom all the way in here, and we select shape layer 1, you can see a very, very faint outline comes up, the actual path itself. So you can see where we're working with. This is going to save us a whole bunch of time, especially if we have to select 700 different colors for this portrait. So with shape 1, here's how we're going to begin colorizing. We select fill, we select the color picker, and then boom, we use our eyedropper tool to select that color, hit OK, and you can see we've got our first filled shape. Now we go over to shape 2, and we can do the same exact thing here with shape 2. Go fill, grab the color picker, boom, hit OK, we've got shape 2. Great. Now we can do it with shape 3, and on, and on, and on, and on. I should point out here, as I'm going through and filling these shapes, you can see this is why straight lines don't really look good. You really don't want a ton of straight lines. Everything really should be some kind of an angle. See how much more natural, not really natural, but see how much more cool this looks, where it's all these angular lines running into each other. When we have these straight up and down lines, it really kind of, I don't know, it's a little bit of a blemish, but we're not going to go and redo it for the sake of time, but that's something to keep an eye on as you go and you continue building wireframe after wireframe for all of your different various low poly effects. Well, all right, so we've gone ahead and spent some time colorizing all of those different shapes that we've drawn. You can see 797 shapes. They're all colorized. I believe they're all colorized, at least. We can double check it here. I can drag the layers panel back over into here to put it away. And I'm just gonna select this topmost layer, and I'm gonna scroll all the way down to the bottom and select the bottommost layer here by holding down the Shift key and then selecting that layer. And then I'm gonna hit Command or Control G to group them into one easy to turn on and off layer group here. And I'm just gonna call this layer group Low Poly, just like that. So then if I shut that off, turn it on, you can see our effect rather drastically. It's actually pretty cool. Now, we're going to go ahead and check for some little lines. We're going to do this by adding a layer between our reference image and the low poly effect. So with the low poly layer group selected, I'm going to hold down my Command or Control key and select the new layer icon to drop a layer beneath it. Now I'm going to go Edit, Fill, and choose to fill with white. There we go, hit OK. Now, check this out. You can see we actually have these little tiny lines between all of our shapes, and in fact, right there, we missed something, so that's not quite lined up. Let's just go in and correct that real quick. Here's how you can quickly correct something like this. We obviously want to select this shape or those two shapes, whatever shape is going to be in the back, behind the rest of everything. So grab the Move tool and hold down the Command or Control key and click that shape. All right, so that's shape 443. Let's see what these are. That's shape 364, and that's shape 380. So this shape 443 is actually up in the front. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select shape 364 here, and I'm going to use my direct selection tool, and I'm going to select that layer, and I'm going to choose, if I zoom way in here, you can see there's a little anchor point right there. I'm going to grab that, and I'm just going to drag this guy over here, just kind of like that. All right, you can see it just moves that right into line. Cool. And now I'm going to move back to the Move tool, holding down my Command or Control key. I'm going to click this shape here. This is shape 380. I'm going to go back to my direct selection tool. Hotkey again is the letter A. Select that shape. You can see I can see a little tiny anchor point. Great. And I can drag this guy right over just like that. Just kind of until it's almost perfect. Doesn't have to be entirely perfect. You're going to see in a second we're going to kind of correct any kind of little blemishes and all of these sort of semi-opaque lines. All right, that's great. It doesn't look like we have any other glaring blemishes that are jumping out at us. All right, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take this layer group and I'm going to convert it to a smart object. Now, you may be thinking, oh no, we're going to lose all these different layers that we just spent all that time working on. We aren't. They're going to be bound up within the smart object. So right-click and choose Convert to Smart Object. So right now, yeah, it looks like we just lost everything. But if you double-click the smart object thumbnail, you can see it opens up this .psb file, and all of our layers are right here within this file. So we still have all of those files. Now, I'm going to say don't save this. It's still saving as a smart object. Don't worry about that. It was just a little adjustment that got made while we were in there. Oh, and look at this. There actually is something that's off base here, so we need to correct that too. So now that we've created the smart object, here's how we correct something. We have to go within the smart object and then open it up within here. So let's zoom in. Check this out. All right. Now, I happen to know that this triangle here is going to be the triangle that is most in front. So what we'll do is we'll tweak that this time. So I'm going to select that shape 513. I'm going to select it with the direct selection tool. I'm just going to move it back just a smidgen, just like that. And then, ooh, you know what? On this side, I don't want to do that. I want to select this shape here, shape 96. This is one of the original shapes. I'm going to pull it just, whoop, make sure I'm selecting the anchor point. There we go. I'm going to pull that anchor point right over like that. It's just going to tuck right underneath our larger shape very neatly. There we go. Great. And we can check this shape as well, shape 61. I'm going to grab the direct selection tool once again. The direct selection tool, excuse me, is basically just going to allow us to select the individual anchor points on our path, which is fairly important here when we're working with these fine edges here. I'm just trying to get this pulled. There we go. That looks great. All right, cool. So we got it cleaned up. And don't worry, it looks a little funky because we have it pinched very tightly together, whereas we have these very uniform, lightly, hardly be able to see through white-looking lines in between all the rest of our shapes. We're going to correct all of that in a second. All right. Nothing else looks like it's jumping out at me. Now I'm going to hit Command or Control S to save that .psb file, close it. It's now saved within our smart object. Great. All right, now all we need to do to get rid of these semi-opaque lines is duplicate our smart object by hitting Command or Control J, maybe once, maybe twice, maybe 3 times, so something like that. So we've just boom, 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 duplicated our smart object over and over and over. Now I'm going to select all 4 of these smart objects by holding down my Shift key. Oh, and actually, by the way, these are all just copies of the smart object. So they're not new smart objects. So if I come into one smart object, like low poly 3 here, right? If I go into this smart object and I don't know, let me just go all the way up to the top here, create a new layer. And let's say on this new layer, I take the brush tool, I'll right click, I'll make a very hard brush, make a fairly large brush. Let's say I take a brush colored red. Let's just go with a red here. I'm going to reduce the opacity to like, I don't know, 30% or something like that. And I paint one semi-opaque red dot. Now remember, if this triples up and there's 4 of these dots, or quadruples up really, 4 of these dots all piled on top of one another, that red dot is going to be like solid red in the other Photoshop document. So if I save this, right, I'm only working in one of the smart objects, but you can see we have a solid red dot, and sure enough, if we look at our thumbnails, that red dot has moved into all the smart objects. Why is this important? Not because we want to place a red dot within the smart object. It's important because if we see any other changes that need to happen to any of these lines, all we need to do is come into one of the smart objects, edit the path, and it's going to automatically update across all of our smart objects. In fact, if I save the smart object here, you're going to see it's going to get rid of that red dot in all of those smart objects. So that just lets us know that we can have this smart object and multiple copies of the smart object, and we're not really messing anything up. So I'm going to hold down Shift, I'm going to select the lowest smart object, and I'm going to group these into a smart object by right-clicking and choosing Convert to Smart Object. And again, we still preserve all those smart objects. All we do is double-click within this smart object. We have our 4 smart objects. Double-click within any one of these, and we're back to our low poly, all of those individual triangle layers. So I'm going to close out of both of those smart objects. Now, if you do want to scale this in Photoshop, it is all path-based. However, if you try to scale it here just as the smart object, you're going to see that it's not going to behave like a true vector object. See, I commit that change, and now if I zoom in to 100%, you can see the edges are starting to pixelate and not look as perfect as they should. What you really want to do if you need to scale this is go all the way in and get to the paths themselves in the low poly, as deep as you can get in the smart objects, and scale this. When you save and commit this change, all of the other smart objects are going to update just like we looked at with like the stupid red dot that we used before. All right, so now that we have our smart object, we're going to go ahead and create a background. So I'm going to open up the Adobe Bridge here, and I'm going to open up this shot, this photo that I took. Well, let me just double click to open it in Photoshop, of the Tennessee State Capitol building down in Nashville, Tennessee. This is going to be our background. So we're going to drag our smart object and drop it into this photo. Now the smart object's probably going to be a little large, so I'm going to hit Command or Control T, hold on my Shift key, just scale it down just a little bit. Maybe something like that is cool. All right, great. Now that we have that, what I want to do is I want to tweak the background a little bit. So I'm actually going to shut that low poly off, and I'm going to select the background layer. We're going to create a new layer, and we're going to go Edit, Fill, and we're going to fill this background layer with 50% gray. All right. Then we're going to go Filter, Noise. We're going to add noise. We're going to add about 100% worth of noise. Uniform is perfect as far as distribution is concerned, and we need to tick on monochromatic. That's important. Once we've done that, we can go ahead and hit Command or Control L and just boost the levels. We're just going to sort of increase the contrast between the blacks and whites. Hit OK, and you're not going to see a ton of difference, but there's some difference in there. And then we're going to go Filter, Pixelate, Mosaic. And we're going to add a mosaic that has a cell size of 100 pixels square. Hit OK. You can see we got lots of little squares. Now we need to increase the contrast of this in a major way. So again, Command or Control L is going to bring up the Levels dialog box. And I'm going to drag this over to about 100, I don't know, 100, 105, something like that. And then I'm going to drag the white point over just until my midpoint here, this little gray slider, is at about the middle of my little peak there. So something like that looks pretty good. So like 104 and 148 on my ends, something in that general neighborhood. Hit OK. And we're going to set this to a layer blend mode of overlay. All right, so you see we're starting to get this little squared effect. I want to double this effect up, so I'm going to hit Command or Control J to duplicate that effect, and you can see I've got a very strong kind of boxy looking effect happening in the background. So it's, I don't know, it's just going to sort of subliminally make it look a little bit low poly, even though it is a photo. I'm going to shut that layer off again so I'm not distracted by it. All right, now that we've done that, I want to, you know what, actually, we're going to turn the low poly layer back on. I want to apply a couple adjustment layers to this layer, and then we're going to sort of blend the whole thing together and add a neat little lighting effect to it. So we're going to begin with a color balance adjustment layer, and I'm going to clip this adjustment layer to just the model here. So I'm going to hold down my Alt or Option key, hover between the adjustment layer and the layer below, click that, boom. Now the color balance layer is only going to apply the effect to the low poly model here. We're going to begin with shadows. So in shadows, I'm going to add a little bit of cyan, so like -6, -7 looks good. I'm also going to add a little bit of magenta, so like -6 probably looks good there as well. And then I'm going to add some blue. So +9, that's great. All right, I'm going to go over to midtones. Midtones, I'm not going to mess with cyan or red. I'm going to add just a touch of magenta to my midtones, and I'm going to also add just a touch of blue. So I'm just trying to influence the color of what I've got going on here to kind of match the background a little bit. And if it looks like there's too much purple or blue or anything like that, I can always scale one or the other back. Now over here in the highlights, I want to maybe add some cyan to the highlights. About -10, -11 looks good. I'm also going to go with a little bit more magenta in the highlights. So something around -10, that looks good. And then also I'm going to add yellow to the highlights, yellow to her skin, essentially. Her skin is the brightest part of the image. So you can see we've just added that color effect, helped kind of blend her a little bit more with the background. There might be still a little bit too much purple in her hair, in which case I can go to the shadows and just scale back on the magenta going on in her hair. Something like that, -2 instead of -6. That looks pretty good. All right, and we're also going to apply a levels adjustment here just to reduce the contrast in her hair a little bit. So I'm going to clip that on top of the color balance adjustment layer, which again is going to limit this levels adjustment just to her. And I'm going to shift my midtone over just a little bit, my midtone slider just a touch. And I'm also going to boost my highlights just a little bit, tiny bit. And that looks pretty good. So I'm just doing a slight contrast adjustment, and that's just going to be so she pops off the background a little bit because of what's coming next. We're going to apply a gradient map over this whole thing, which is going to kind of squish everything together a little bit. All right, let's add some light behind her to really make her jump off the background a little bit more. We're going to hold down the Command or Control key and click on that layer thumbnail to load her as a selection. We're going to add a layer beneath her again by holding down the Command or Control key and hitting the new layer icon. All right, that looks good. And I'm going to fill this layer with a very bright blue. Now, I have this blue color written down. If I can find where I have it written. All right, it is 5B88BF. So it's this very light blue. Really, it can be any light blue, but I just have this. I'm going to go Alt Backspace, Option Delete if you're on the Mac, and that fills that with that light blue. Command or Control D to deselect. I'm going to duplicate this layer because we just want a second copy of it. We can shut her off for a second and actually shut off the bottom blue color layer as well. So on this layer, we're going to go Filter, Blur, Motion Blur. And this motion blur, I basically have it set exactly how I want it to be. An angle of -45 at a distance of 1,000 pixels is perfect. Hit OK. Now, in order to add some drama to this, we're going to grab the brush tool. I'm going to right-click, and I'll grab just a 70-pixel brush, set the hardness to 0. All right, that's great. We're going to paint with the color white, so just make sure your foreground color is set to white. And then along areas that kind of look like they're naturally ridges, make sure the opacity is set to 100. You can sort of see we already have ridges in this blur that we've created. So I'm just going to add these like white streaks along there. All right, that's just going to add like this additional element of coolness to it. I know it looks really bad right now. Don't worry about that. We're going to fix that in a second. And I'm just going to add a random one out here. All right, now in order to blend these white streaks in, just hit Command or Control F. Command or Control F is going to do this right here. It's going to apply that same exact motion blur. So Command or Control F, 1, 2, 3. Yeah, probably 3 times looks good. And then we're going to set this layer to the blend mode of color dodge. Let's try that. Yeah, very, very bright. I know it's blowing out the Capitol building. Don't worry about that. She's going to cover up the Capitol building. See that? All right, so now the other blue layer, what we're going to do with this is we're just going to hit this with a single motion blur in the same direction, and we're going to set this to the blend mode of overlay. There we go. So you see it's just intensifying some of the blue a little bit, giving her a little bit more of an outline, just like that. And if you think that this effect is too strong, you can select both the layers, reduce the overall opacity, which maybe we'll do. Set it to something like that, right around 50%. That looks good. And now that we've done that, we're just going to apply some finishing touches, an overall levels adjustment of, well, let's see here. I'm going to boost this back to increase the contrast a little bit, but we're going to counteract this in a second. Maybe right about there. That looks good. I'm going to adjust my mid-tone here. There we go. That looks pretty good. And then I'm going to leave the whites kind of where they are. Now I'm going to really pull up on the output slider. This is going to kill off a lot of contrast. You can see, I mean, it's really, really flattening the image out. And I'm going to pull back on the whites as well. It's just going to dull up some of the whites a little bit. We're doing that because I'm going to apply a gradient map adjustment layer. And you can see, well, it looks crazy right now, but we're going to set the proper gradient here. We're going to choose black to white. You can see, well, it's already almost brought back some of the contrast, not quite all of it, but we're going to change the colors here. We're going to make this gradient map run from this blue color, which I have written down here. It's 1F2 134. All right, so a very dark blue. We're going to have it run to a little bit of a lighter blue, which actually I believe might have been the same as the light blue that we just used behind the girl, right? This 5B88BF, hit OK, hit OK. And all we need to do here is set this gradient map to the blend mode of soft light. So you can see that it almost balances perfectly. If we didn't have that levels adjustment layer underneath this, really killing off contrast, it would have just been super contrasty. All right, so we'll actually reduce this opacity a bit. You know what? We're going to select both of these. I'm going to reduce the opacity of them overall, maybe like 50%. So we're just adding some contrast and color at the end of the whole thing to really influence the way it all works together. You can see if we need her to pop out a little bit more, we can make her a little bit brighter or a little bit darker, vice versa, whatever it takes. So there you have it. We've gone ahead, we've created this entire low poly effect. Now, if you go check out the article on tutvid.com, you can download this background so you can use it right along with me. And also, I have links to a couple low poly editors. They're free tools that were made to help you create the low poly effect. I don't think they work as well as doing it yourself, but as you can see, it's very time consuming to do it yourself. Even if you get great looking effects and great looking work in the end, it still does take a bit of time. But you can go over to tutvid.com. The link is in the description to this tutorial. You can check out those other free editors that I have linked in the written part of this tutorial. You can give them a shot. You can try them out. They are free, like I said. You can download them and give them a go and see if you like them or not. For me, I prefer to do it this way, so this is it. This is how you do a low poly effect in Photoshop. It is vector, so you can scale it up, you can scale it down, do whatever you want. Is it as perfect as maybe doing it in something like Adobe Illustrator? Probably not, but you know what? If you only have Photoshop, it can be done in Photoshop, and you can do it really well in Photoshop as well. So for this one, that's it. Thank you guys so much for sticking around and checking it out. Make sure you go check out www.tutvid.com and follow me on Twitter @tutvid for more great video tutorials and all kinds of everything Photoshop, graphic design, photography, and the whole 9 yards. Thanks for sticking around, guys. Hey, wait, stop. Before you click away from this video, I just want to remind you, if you enjoyed the video, go ahead and hit that little like button. It helps this video go up, and going up is what I like. That's what we want to do. If you also have a couple more seconds, go ahead and leave a comment. That's cool, too. That's it for this one. If you enjoyed this video, check out either of these two videos right here for more of the stuff that I do. This hand is weird. Right there. Thanks, guys.